In this video we were talking about hierarchies. Now what is a hierarchy? In layman's terms it's kind of like a pecking order. So someone being kind of like a team member, team leader, manager, etc. So someone being in charge of another person essentially, or another object in our case. So there are a few things we can do. We can combine, group and parent. So we'll start off with grouping first. So you'll see here, actually before we get onto grouping etc. Just to let you know, if you go to Windows Outliner, you'll get this little window here. Now the outline is a really great tool to use. Basically it tells you everything that's in your scene and even the hierarchy that it's in. So you'll see here we have Pokemon base. If I select it here in the outline, it also selects it in the scene. This is very useful if you have a very highly populated area or populated scene and you can't really find certain things, and if you name them correctly like I have, you'll find that it's quite easy to select the things that you want. So for instance, this is polysurface free, and I think it's just this little aspect here that's kind of there. So it's really good to kind of find certain things that shouldn't be in your scene. So like for instance, right now it's just like, hang on, what is polysurface free? I can just kind of go to it, and it's just a little face here that I could possibly just delete and get rid of. That's kind of like in the way at the moment. So it's kind of good to help clean up your scene. So again, like, there's one here that I can just kind of go in and delete because I don't need it. But I'm not going to get into that. I'm not going to clean up my scene right at the moment. So what we'll do is we'll start off with grouping. So if I hold Shift or click and drag, I'll select the base and the button. If I press Control G, I've now created a new group, and I can name this group. So I'll just call this Pokeball _1. So now make sure you have this particular icon on. As you can see, it says selected by hierarchy and combinations. If that was off, for example here, I couldn't really select the groups, or vice versa. If I select this, I can't really select any of the groups. So make sure the hierarchy is on. That way, if I select any part of the object, it's grouped together. Now these are still technically two objects, but now they're kind of under their own hierarchy. And you see here it says Pokeball 1. If I click on the little plus icon here, you can see that I can select the individual parts of the object. If I just Control Z it, undo that grouping. Come on. There we are. Okay, so the other way of using a hierarchy is we can combine objects. So if I just click the button and the Pokeball base here, if I go to Mesh, Combined, and you'll see now that here that there's no plus button. This is now counts as just one entire mesh rather than any sort of hierarchy. So I can't really go in there and mess around with them. However, what I can do is if you go to face, double click, it actually selects that original object rather than the whole object. So I can go in and actually change the button size a little bit and just bring it back down. Or same with the actual Pokeball itself. I can kind of double click it, bring it back down. If you want to uncombine these or separate them, what you do is you click on your object, go to mesh and separate, and it'll make them back into two objects. And the last hierarchy that we can use is known as parenting. Parenting is a really useful tool, especially when it comes to animation, which we'll show in a bit. So what we do is, now think of parenting as just like real world parenting actually. So if you're a 5-year-old kid and you're walking through some sort of supermarket, your mother or father is walking ahead. What do? You follow the parent, and it's the same sort of process here in 3D. We're going to create an object which is going to be the parent object, and all the children underneath it will follow the parent. Then we can move the parent around and the children will follow, and we're also able to select individual children and manipulate them as we see fit. So I will make the So if I select the button and then select the Pokeball, remember it's the last object which is going to be the parent. Then press P. Now if I click on the Pokeball, you'll see that I can select, it will select both the Pokeball and the button at the same time. And just like with the parent, just like with the grouping, sorry, it will have a little plus icon here, and you can see that I've got both objects in there. And if I click the button, you'll see that I can set the individual button, mess around with that as much as I want. But the parent is always in control. One thing you might have noticed is when you parent or combine or group, depending on where your object is in the scene. So for instance, my object isn't actually in the center as it usually is. The pivot, which is these icons here when you press E, R, or W, stays right in the center. And we don't want it to do that because if you see, if I rotate it it rotates around the pivot. That's the whole idea of the pivot, is basically it's the area of rotation for your object. Kind of see right now, you can kind of see that it's rotating around the pivot, kind of like how the Earth rotates around the sun. We can actually change this if you want. So for instance, if you go to modify, fourth one down, it says center pivot, and it moves it right into the middle of the object. So now if I rotate it now, you'll see that it'll rotate on the actual object rather than over here. So those are the basic hierarchies that you can do in Maya.